Hi, my name is Myrna Boyer, and I'm the founder and director of New Horizons Homeschool and Academy. And to my left is Arthur Boyer.
Arthur Boyer. I'm the director of New Horizons West.
And to my right is
Grisel Rodriguez. I'm the director of NHHSA Trans Mountain, to be open on June 2020.
And Grisel is the only non-Boyer here, but that's okay. We were not going to hold that against you, Grisel. What a way to start. What a way to start.
Right.
So I think today what we're going to talk about, the first thing I think we should kind of throw around is who is homeschooling really good for? And I'll open it up to.
Okay. I think you've mentioned this before, or usually I hear you talk about it when you're interviewing parents. At least the crowd that seems to be most attracted to homeschooling are either the gifted students, who get easily bored in a traditional classroom because they don't learn at the same pace as everybody else, or the students who are struggling in a traditional classroom because of a learning disability or because of maybe an anxiety disorder, a panic disorder. I have a student who I just enrolled on the West Side not too long ago, who deals with severe anxiety in the classroom. He's okay around crowds because he goes to concerts and he doesn't mind being in a public place, but I guess he has a lot of really negative associations with the classroom environment in particular, because all it takes is maybe 2 or 3 students to be sharing a room with him in the classroom while he's trying to study, and he'll start to get the tightness in the chest, difficulty breathing, and just total panic. Mm-hmm. So, and that's because of some bad experiences that he had at the last school that he was at before he came to us.
Right.
And he doesn't have any learning disabilities that I'm aware of. He reads fine, he writes fine. He's maybe just a little bit behind. Mm-hmm. But we've been able to catch him up on his math quite a lot in the last couple of weeks.
Which is not just half the battle; it's 2/3 the battle in catching him up on his work.
And he really is just a guy who just wants to be left alone. Honestly, he wants to just kind of attend to his work and block out everything. I understand that, but we're also trying to ease him into being more comfortable with socializing with people in an academic environment.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think in talking about gifted kids, one of the things that strikes me about them is that it's not just that they don't do well in traditional classrooms because they tend to learn faster, they tend to absorb information faster. But I think one of the fundamental problems is that when the boredom sets in, when their giftedness is not addressed or even goes uncovered, if nobody's tested them, and that's not so hard to do. To overlook giftedness is not so hard to do, because all you need is a child who is gifted, who is not challenged enough, and consequently becomes a disciplinary problem. They get bored. I was hearing about just such a student the other day, where I was even told that the student would say, "School is for those of you who don't know." And so when he would go to class, he was nothing but a disciplinary problem, because it was not anything that interested or challenged him. And when he finally was tested, he turned out to be gifted. What do you think? What do you think? Who do you think?
That's to say nothing of the students who feel like they're wasting their time studying the majority of subjects that they are forced to study because they're not relevant in any way to job skills that they need.
Yeah, and sometimes they are. In honest truth, our kids have some good arguments, and I think it's right.
They're often right about that.
Yeah.
They do have to learn a lot of stuff that's not going to come in handy, that they're going to forget as soon as they're done with the exam.
Right.
And so I think that leads to a lot of resentment and resistance.
So what does this boil down to?
I think it boils down to, what a lot of students and families want is the ability to have a little more control over what they learn and how they learn it, and on what kind of schedule they learn it. And so homeschooling is appropriate for that crowd, for the people who don't just want to study whatever program you think's best for them, but kind of wants to tailor their focus a little bit to their interests,
right?
Rather than have this broad range of topics, most of which won't be relevant to whatever it is they're interested in.
And should. But let's cover then. Okay, you give us a good lead-in. Let's cover then the the myths, because then you can say if you just let a child study whatever he's interested in, then what about preparation for college, university? What do you think?
Well, if the student is interested in college, then they ought to know what sorts of skills they're going to need to be able to get in college.
Right.
So you can't ignore subjects that you might not even be interested in, like algebra or pre-algebra. If you want to get into college, you're just going to have to buckle down and do it anyway as a means to an end. Right. So it's all about, I think it's one of the most important things, especially for the homeschool crowd, is to get clear on what your goals are, with the caveat that your goals might change. You don't have to. That doesn't mean you have to decide on what your major is going to be when you're 12 or 13. But you have to have some kind of objective. You have to have some kind of long-term goal, with the understanding that you will also need to be flexible enough to change the goal if you change your mind, or if you decide you're not that interested in what you initially thought you were interested in.
And you will be surprised at how many 12 and 13-year-olds do know what they want to study in college. Not that all of them do.
I wasn't one of those. So,
no, but you know, I would say the vast majority of the ones that I talk to do know, or at least they have an idea. And even if that transforms into something else as they get older, they do have an idea usually. Some kids don't. Some kids just have general interests, and so they should be addressed that way. So getting back to the question then, what are the some of the myths about homeschooling that you are aware of? For instance, you know, do homeschoolers go to college? What do you think?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I'm evidence for that. I was homeschooled. I went to college. I didn't have any trouble getting into college, and no homeschooler does unless they don't know what they're supposed to know.
Yeah.
You apply as a homeschooled student, and a lot of colleges are happy to accept homeschool students because they know that they perform better for the most part compared to public school students, and it makes the colleges look good.
Yeah.
So their numbers, from what I understand, to attract homeschool students. So
I remember
it's not hard if you know your stuff.
I remember that when, as a homeschool student, you went into the dual credit program at EPCC, and I remember that your grades were so good that one of the counselors, or I don't know if it was somebody in the finance office, but somebody made a comment to you about how they felt that your grades were really good because your parents were paying for the school and you weren't getting financial assistance yet. And really, it was probably more along the lines that you had a certain motivation to. Because you love to learn, or you had certain interests. You wanted to learn. You wanted to be in college, and it wasn't. It was something that was evident in the work and subsequently in your grades and your GPA. What else do you think? What are some other myths about homeschooling? What do you think, Grisel?
Well, I was one of them. Before I started working here, there weren't that many students that would go to public school where I graduated from. And everybody would say that it's something fake, that you can't even graduate from it, or further on your education to undergrad or even your master's degree. But ever since I've worked for you guys, I've seen how, I don't know, hundreds of students that I've worked for have improved and done way better work here than in the public schools where I was raised.
What do you think about that, AJ? It's like, what is the difference? Why is there such a difference, something like that? Because the idea is that if they're going to be homeschooled, the kids are weird, and homeschooling doesn't have the same education as a public school. You certainly don't have the same resources. What would you say to that?
To try to explain why homeschoolers do better in
why
in this
do
kind
they
of environment or a home-based environment.
And so
it's just a matter of fit. Not all institutions are a good fit for all students, and most students just I think most students just feel like they have to bear it, and even though they don't like their school, they just sort of put up with whatever they have to in order just to get it done and get through it. But for homeschoolers, for whatever reasons, could be the infinite variety of reasons why they can't. They just can't cope. So I'm not sure enough importance is placed on or enough emphasis is placed on the importance of institutional fit. The idea that you have to try to find a school that is a good fit for you, for your student, for your child.
Right.
And because they're not all the same, they don't all have all the same kinds of teachers, they don't have all the same kinds of teaching methodologies. But part of the problem is that the state takes away that right to choose by forcing them to attend a school according to the accident of wherever they happen to live.
Right, but you do have, to be fair, there are, SISD, in fact, I'm almost sure has open enrollment. Am I wrong about that? There are some schools with open enrollment where anybody can go. For instance, I just...
Now they do that, yes.
Yeah, so they're, they're able to do that. I don't know what you would think about it, but I am for the voucher system because I know what it's like to be operating a homeschool that that is spending 1/2 per student of what the public school system receives per student for the year, and we still get the job done.
The same is true if you compare Catholic schools with public schools. By the way, they spend a lot less per student.
Yeah. Okay.
Than public
I
schools
didn't know
do
that. I didn't know that.
With better educational outcomes, based on the little bit of data that I've seen here and there.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? Why? Because I mean, I thought the whole thing is that the school systems need to spend more money. Teachers need raises. I mean,
Right.
Isn't it in California just recently that they went on strike because they wanted to get a higher raise than what the school they were being offered?
This
so
is what they're always doing.
Because
Though.
the private institutions have smaller environments for the students, so they are
That could be
allowed
part
to
of it.
thrive.
That's probably part of it, and maybe their unique programs are part of it. I'm sure there are a variety of reasons to explain why they outperform public school students. But I think part of it comes down to the fact that also that the parents have a choice.
Yeah.
When you're in the private sector, they don't send the children to the schools that they don't want them to go to. There's a lot less freedom in the public school system. There was another point I wanted to come back to.
Well, I think personally, I think that attention to the student does have something to do with that. You also have, in some cases, you have a different culture.
I was going to say
Go
that the districts are always asking for more money, and the teachers' unions are always asking for more money because they've been doing this for decades. I was saying that I don't think anybody really disputes, or there's some controversy over how to best interpret the data the last time I looked, but I don't think people really dispute that on average, homeschoolers tend to outperform public school students in college.
I know.
Let me see if I can find something here.
All right. While you're doing that, the thing is that, look, I think one of the biggest benefits of homeschooling is the outperformance is good. We love having those stats. We love that that's available to us.
Also, according to this, a slightly larger percentage of homeschool children attend college compared to traditional public school students, and some top-tier colleges like Yale, Dartmouth, and UC Berkeley actually actively seek out homeschool students and accept them at a high rate.
Right.
Yeah. They like the self-motivation and self-discipline.
Exactly, and that's the whole thing is that homeschooling does encourage not just a love of learning, which in itself is really important, but it encourages a student just naturally, they have to be more self-motivated, and they tend to be more interested in the material they're learning. They even tend to follow research trends in a way that serves their studies because they're free to do that kind of thing. It's a different world, really, to homeschool. What's another myth?
The socialization myth, I think, is probably one of the most common ones. Is that here it is, myth number one on this on connectionsacademy.com. Myth number one: homeschool students don't socialize.
Yeah. What do you think about that? What's your view?
I do think that we get more students that are less, are a little bit more shy in the public setting.
Sure.
But once they're in class and they're in with less students, you can see that it's as if they never had a problem with being social at anywhere else.
Right.
I think socialization is a deal because to say that is to take into account, it's like saying that their interaction with you, with their cousins, with their uncles, with their sisters and their brothers in their church,
right.
Or any
other,
their sports, it doesn't matter, and it's not there, and they're not socialized like we're.
Yeah, it sounds like we're assessing their socialization skills solely on how well they socialize in class.
And what does that tell us about about say,
It tells
publicly
us-
funded
I
schooling.
think it tells us that we've come to view public schools as primarily institutions for socialization.
Exactly.
This
I
is
think
where
so
you go
too.
to. This is where you go to gain important life experiences. This is where you go to learn how to socialize with friends and members of the opposite sex. This is where you go to learn how to become a mature adult or something.
Right.
It's completely crazy. I mean, schools are not supposed to be institutions for socialization.
They're certainly
institutions
not
for learning.
exclusively vehicles for socialization, and
And the idea that they would only that people only become socialized in an institutional environment is completely ridiculous. Anyway,
yeah.
the majority of socialization would occur outside of that environment anyway if we
And
left them to
does-
their own
and
devices
does.
and didn't force them to
Yeah.
be somewhere most of whom don't want to be.
Yeah, exactly. No, I completely agree. I at least and I know what you're talking about though, Grisel, because we attract students, say, who have social anxiety. So they on campus, right? So they because we happen to have a classroom campus for kids to come to, and they tend to be the shyer kind. Not that the vast majority of, I would say not even 5%
Right.
are that shy. Our kids seem to be communicative and outgoing, and they're well, as our recent videos on Instagram and Facebook have shown, they debate well. They're willing to express their points of view, and this is not typical for children who are 7, 8 years of age.
What do
Did you
you-
guys see the
Would be
video?
to be
I saw
given
the
the
video.
opportunity.
Yes,
to-
it given the opportunity to have an opinion about something that you're learning or that you're discussing is.
So, just in your experience, what do you think you hear on a daily basis, or on a month, whatever, as the most common reason why people have left the districts and want to come to you for schooling?
Generally, the most common reasons are
Attendance, I think, is a pretty
Yeah.
big one, right? Yeah.
attendance. Honestly, it's the social environment, the very thing that parents seem
Bad
to seek
influence.
out and putting them.
Okay.
No, it's the social environment in terms of they're being bullied. The student that you have, that you said with that social anxiety, he was bullied incessantly. Mom has been trying to homeschool him for a couple of years, and she just
Right.
didn't feel very successful at it.
Right.
Step in NHHSA, and you're doing an excellent job. But
That's why I don't like this myth about parents being unqualified to teach their own children. I mean, who is better qualified? We're so obsessed
Well,
with
your
this
student
idea of credential, with the idea that you have to have a certain credential to be able to teach a subject.
I
Completely ridiculous, and we don't assume that parents are smart enough to know their own limits, to know when they have to hand it over to somebody else because they've
Yeah.
hit the limit of their knowledge or their
And
skills.
if you do, you can. I mean, there's tutors. There's a place like ours where
Yeah.
you can come to for assistance. There's all kinds of assist. My lord,
And parents aren't stupid. They know to if they're on the lookout, they know
They
to
know what their child needs. They're the person that knows
and
their
they
child
know
And if
whether
they're
or not they can
resourceful enough,
produce that.
right,
Right.
right.
They can. And if they can't, if they're interested in their child's progress, they would know enough to go to an expert. I'll tell you what.
seek out a
Recently,
tutor, at least. Parents aren't.
there's we have another the set of 3 sisters that we just recently enrolled for NHHSA West, and it all began with a little one. Same thing. Complaint was they were bullying, and not just other students. The little girl has scoliosis, so she wears a brace, so she was being made fun of, and it was, I mean, in first grade that would affect you. And so Mom took her out to homeschool her herself, even though she had no idea what she was doing.
Right.
And then in Googling that, she found an HHSA
Right.
and found out what she could do. And Mom is over the moon about, and so is the little girl. She comes in here, she can be a part of something. She's not isolated. Nobody makes fun of her. It's just Mom says it's fun and it's learning. It's fun and it's learning. And that's the whole point, is that education does not have to be a kind of penal institution. For me, when I go to a public school, since I've been around this for so many years, like 25, and this is the schooling that I gave to my children, to go into a public school, if you've ever visited a prison, it's very similar. It's very similar. It's very sterile.
Yeah,
And
I had a friend on Facebook who referred to public schools as daytime jails.
well, that somebody really doesn't like schooling. So,
Well, I wish I could actually, if I find because I saved the whole. He made a post on Facebook one day. It was this long kind of diatribe, actually, but it was quite good, and I did save the quote. If I can find it, I'll pull it up for you. If you don't mind?
No, at all.
I can leave it anonymous in case this person doesn't want me to quote him, but I think he wouldn't mind, actually.
Well, maybe we should ask.
We
We should leave him anonymous for now.
I'm not so sure he wants to be anonymous, but anyway.
So the whole the point is it's that, and it's the opportunity to graduate early. It's the whole personalized. Your child matters. That's what I hear when parents come in to talk to me. It's because their children matter to them, and so when we say yes, it matters to us as well. And your child can advance or can get additional help if they need it. You know, if it inspires a love of learning, if it inspires them to become lifelong learners, which is actually what we are anyway, it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. Are you looking for that quote?
Yeah, let me see if I can find it here. I know I referenced it during one of the graduation speeches I gave a couple years ago.
Anyway, and then in some cases you do have, parents with social anxieties, you have children with social anxieties, and then you just have parents who are very concerned about the school environment. Did you find it? Go ahead. You got. Go ahead. Go
and
first.
Also, where parents don't know how they are being selected or put in special places in public school,
right?
And they're being labeled as something, so that I just think, in my opinion, when I was in high school, you could only see the ones that were thriving in school.
Right.
I mean, those were the only ones that were being made learn.
Yeah.
And the others that were labeled as something, everybody was just left alone rather than included within everybody else.
I agree. They weren't integrated. Which
Correct.
group were you in? I'm just curious. Were you one of the ones that was shining?
I was
What
one
two
of
groups
them,
are we
yes.
talking
I was
about?
one of them that
Oh
was
my
shining.
goodness! And now
But
you
because
have
there's different
guilt.
No, I don't have guilt. It's just that I never thought about it in that perspective. I would always think of, I have to be the best. I have to do all the work, and if not, the teachers will beat me up. That's how I would see it in my mind. If I forgot something at home, I was like almost crying because I thought I was going to get a 0. I was that type of student. But as I became a mother, I learned, like, oh my goodness, wait a second. My kids are not just like me. They have other learning abilities, and they're better at some things, and they're not as good as others. But I mean, that's when I took a step back, and I saw it's like, okay, well, of course, like we say, not everybody thrives in a certain environment.
Yes, exactly.
I don't know if parents ask themselves that question enough. Whether is this particular school, this institution, whatever, is it a good fit
for my child? Okay, that looks really long. Are you just going to?
I'm not
going
to
to
read the whole thing. I was just looking at it. It's something a friend of mine had posted on Facebook a few years ago, and I used this in the address to the class of 2014. He was talking about teachers, and I felt like this was an objection to the whole teaching profession that I had to grapple with to see, because if he's right, even just a little bit right, then it's like, well, what the heck am I doing here? What do I think I'm doing? What value can I really give? Anyway, here's what he said about it. Okay, so he said, quote, educators are like people who stand next to a beautiful flower and try to take credit for the organism's maturation. It's ridiculous. This is not about educating children. It's about plundering the private sector for wealth to redistribute into the hands of supercilious busybodies and quacks.
Oh, God.
Of education in general, he said that schools were a little more than daytime jails for kids, whereby the state appoints a social worker to make sure his or her life is conducted in a manner that they approve of.
Wow.
Which, if you think
Yes,
about
absolutely.
it, is
That's
not
absolutely
off at
so.
all.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
It is a gross violation, he says, of the privacy of my son's relationship with his parents. Again, also true. I would agree with that. The teachers themselves are barely educated frauds. A little harsh, but a lot of them,
Yeah. Well,
I would totally disagree with that either. Barely educated frauds who know next to nothing about the way in which knowledge grows. That part is true, I think, and how best to impart a love of learning in a child. The teachers are willing pawns in the execution of popular delusions and misconceptions about learning, which at best have no long-term negative effects on a child, and at worst instill a lifelong hatred of academic study.
Yeah.
It's like Yeah, dude.
I think
mean, you
you're.
hit the- you
I
hit the
think
nail on
I
the
know
head,
who
I
this
thought.
person is.
Yeah, yeah,
I
this-
think
yeah,
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know the tone. I know
Yeah.
the voice.
He's absolutely right.
Yeah,
And
well-
then he, and then he says, I challenge any public school teacher in the state to demonstrate that my son does not have in me access to a better education than any one of them can possibly provide.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that matters. Anyway, with that, we're gonna close it up. Any closing
okay.
words for now, and then we'll you all can stay tuned for the next part, for part 2 of our podcast. But any words in closing?
If there was anything if I could push a button and change parents' minds or the general public's opinion in general, just with the push of a button, it would be the idea that number one, parents aren't qualified, quote unquote, to teach their children, and number two, they don't know what they're doing, because I don't think that's fair to them.
I think that's
unfair.
I think that's a great
I think we
thing you
give them
could do.
enough
What
credit.
would you do? What's your thing?
Myths are myths, and people are always going to talk regardless. They're your children, and one knows what's best for them. And if homeschooling is the best decision, then just because the majority of the people are doing otherwise, it doesn't mean your student or your child.
And just
has
because
to.
you don't have a degree in education doesn't mean that you can't
That you can't
that
teach.
you can't contribute
Right.
to your child's education.
Right. And I think I join you in that I believe that if there was one thing that I would change in the current mindset about education is that idea that there are these pods or groups of people outside of the parent who know more about what's best for their children than they know, and I think that's a responsibility that parents have handed over that they need to reclaim, because we know our kids, and it's that desire, because I know that parents love their children, it's that desire to give them the best that should guide the decision about their education. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for joining us, and we'll get together here again really soon.